So hello everyone, my name is Ken Morse and I am the Director for the EAP program at Local 591.
And I'm Tony Lepore. I am the co-director for the TW Local 591 EAP.
So just want to continue to bring attention to the fact that we have an active EAP program at Local 591. Tony and myself and the rest of our team, we all help with anything that has to do with substance abuse and things on the mental health spectrum such as depression and anxiety, anything along those lines.
And keep in mind, we don't only help the member, but we help the family member and the extended family.
And at the core of our program is confidentiality. We will not speak to anyone about something you speak to us about unless you give us permission. So know if you do talk to us, it stops there unless you let us talk to somebody else.
Okay, we're going to do a video today on grief and loss, and we have the pleasure of having Gigi Bissay, and she has written a book called Me After You: Surviving the Loss of a Loved One. And everybody experiences grief in different ways, so we're going to let Gigi introduce herself.
Thank you for having me and being here to talk about this. I am a licensed clinical social worker, licensed substance abuse counselor, and grief and loss and death and dying has been my passion as far as working with my clients and patients around something that is very difficult and tragic that most of us will experience in our life over and over again. I have a private practice. I've been in private practice as a psychotherapist for 25 years. I also do workshops at inpatient treatment centers, intensive workshops on grief and loss, and work privately and individually with clients and with families around this subject.
Thank you. So Gigi, what are the different stages of grief?
Traditionally, a lot of people are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her 5 stages of grief, which we got in the 50s. But since then, there have been a lot of different models. But I call Elizabeth our grandmama, kind of our whole understanding of grief. And she says that we begin with shock and denial, especially if something is very traumatic experience. And it's one of the times in our lives when denial is actually a healthy coping skill. It allows us to push back and push away from something that we're learning that is too much to take in all at once. And then from there, she says that we experience 4 other things. We experience sadness, which is pretty self-explanatory. One of the things that I have noticed about sadness and grief that is unique is that there is a really strong physical component, a physical heaviness in your body. You feel exhausted even when you can rest. We experience anger. And that's a feeling that some of us are comfortable with and some of us are not. Some of us would rather just keep that stuff down nice and tight. But I feel it's a really important part of grieving. And we can be angry at most anything. Just the circumstances, at the person who's gone, at the rules of the road, the medical community, our higher power, whatever that is. And then there is bargaining. And I just describe bargaining as what if, I wish. And this is the stuff that keeps people up at night, ruminating about, if this hadn't happened and this wouldn't have happened. If I would have pushed my mom to take her medication, then she wouldn't have got so sick, then she'd still be here. And we can really get stuck in that space. And where we all hope to end up is at acceptance. And often people feel acceptance is I'm over it, but in grief, there really is no over it. It is healing, and there is finding some peace and living with your grief, your loss. And we may move up and down and back and forth through all of those thoughts and feelings and behaviors and so many more.
So what does grief look like?
Grief is, it can look like, if I had 5 people here, it could look very different in each one of them. And some people are very stoic with their feelings. Some people are very emotional. Some of us tend to want to talk and share our feelings about our loss. Some people will distract themselves from those thoughts and feelings. And so it really varies so widely. And sometimes that's based on the fact that we've had other losses that make this one that we're experiencing now more complicated for us, or we've had traumatic losses.
So how does someone identify if they're struggling with grief?
Often in my practice, some of the patients and clients that I see have been struggling with a loss that may have happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, and they're still emotionally overwhelmed by that, or haven't been able to kind of write their lives again because of this loss. Often people will have delayed or chronic grief because they've distracted themselves from being present and feeling about it. And sometimes it's the roles that we take within our grief system that force us to put it off, or saying, I need to be the responsible person within my family right now, and I will get back to my grief and my feelings later. And unfortunately, some people don't.
So I think we all have really good examples of people that heal from grief in unhealthy ways. Mm-hmm. Are there ways that are healthier or better ways to begin the healing process?
I think it's important to be present and feel your feelings. I always say the healing is through the feelings. You can't go around them, or, if you can be present with that. I've had people who feel like if they start to feel that they may become so overwhelmed that they can't tolerate that. So I had a woman I was working with who said, if I start to get emotional about this, I will cry an ocean. And I said, let's work on you crying a puddle. Let's get something started. So if we're being present, if we're expressing our feelings, if we're reaching out to people for support and allowing people to support us, and we're giving ourselves some time and space to grieve without putting ourselves on a timetable, then we're probably going to have a better experience moving through.
Thank you.
How could someone with grief and loss be affected in the work environment?
I think often some people have been out for a few days, and then I think the employee who is returning may have a lot of anxiety about returning to work. I think it's helpful if they're able to meet with their manager or supervisor before they get started, and have somebody be the buffer between them and everyone else. Often there's a lot of questions about, where were you, or how are you doing? And I've learned that asking someone who is in the intensity of grieving how they're doing is just not a great question. So I changed that question to, how are you making it today? And I feel like that's something that people can hear. But when you ask someone, how are they doing? It's kind of like, how do you think I'm doing? This is the most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. Right. So anything that will help them to reintegrate in a way that's going to be helpful, because they may be a little distracted, slower paced with their work.
Okay. Well, I think this might be a similar question, but if I'm a coworker in the workplace, are there things that I can do to support that person that might be grieving?
I would encourage not avoiding that person, because I think often people get isolated. This is something that many of us are just not comfortable with. You know, we're not comfortable with our own grief when we're grieving, and we can be really uncomfortable with other people's grief.
Great point.
Yeah.
We don't know what to do or say, so sometimes we fall silent, you know, and then this person may get isolated. But I think if we can let them know that we're just sorry about their loss, and that we care, and that we'd like to provide any support that they need, that is helpful. Some people know what they need when they're grieving. They know exactly, and if you could do this for me, that would be great. And it's often really little things, but they make a really big difference for people. Some people just have no idea what they need. So suggest, it's like, hey, can I take care of this for you? Or let me get that call for you. Or, you know, whatever it is that you can just volunteer for to kind of help and support that person and make sure they don't get isolated and feel really alone in their grief.
So thank you, Gigi, for joining us. And as Tony said, Gigi is one of the most respected people in this field, and we're really honored to have her here with us and sharing some of her experience and knowledge. So thank you again.
You're welcome. I'm really pleased to be here and talk about this really important topic.